Hey everyone, welcome to Judging for the Win. I'm Dave, and this is my studio. Today is this month's patron pick, and the topic that was chosen was for me to pull back the curtain and give you all backstage access to see exactly what goes into making an episode of Judging for the Win. Ready? Let's get started. The first step to every episode is coming up with a good topic. Back when I was making 7 episodes a week and I had a lot fewer followers submitting ideas, this was actually one of the hardest parts of the process. Nowadays, I can usually just scroll through the comments of my recent videos or check out the suggestion form that's linked in the description, and I can usually find one reasonably quickly. In case you're wondering what I'm looking for, I do have a few criteria. I want to have a good mix of topics, so I try not to use questions that are similar to situations that I covered recently. In the same way, I try to have a variety of difficulty levels. I shoot for mainly 2 to 3 star rulings with the occasional 1 star and 4 star, so I have something for everybody. So I try not to have too many of the same difficulty in a row also. Then there's a couple of types of questions that I try to avoid. My vision for Judging for the Win is an educational resource, and some types of questions are just better suited for that than others. For example, sometimes I'll see a question that clearly came from a Commander game where there were 4 particularly sadistic players. If the question needs more than 2, or in exceptional circumstances 3 cards to work, then I generally write it off as being too complicated. On the other end of the spectrum, some questions basically boil down to, do you know how this specific case works? And there's just one rule in the CR that just says what the answer is. It's still possible to make interesting episodes out of questions like this if there's a way to, for example, change the answer based on changing one of the cards, but questions like this tend to be harder to make interesting. Then there's the final authority, artistic merit. Everything else I just talked about was just a nice suggestion or a guideline that can be broken if a question has sufficient artistic merit. See, to me, writing a good situation is just as much of a creative work as taking a photograph or making a sculpture. You're trying to capture the essence of a situation in an approachable way. It's kind of hard to succinctly describe exactly what this means to me, other than saying that it's very important. Questions that have really interesting situations or do a particularly good job highlighting an interaction just get me really excited. One of my favorite qualities to have is when a card has multiple unrelated abilities that come together in an unexpected way to make an interesting interaction. After settling on an idea for a question, the next thing is to write a script for the episode. This is actually the longest part of the entire process nowadays. I remember reading somewhere that the sign of a good writer isn't that they write quickly, but that they write slowly. If that's the case, I must be an amazing writer, because I don't think that I've ever written a script that took me less than half an hour all in. A full hour is actually more representative for my videos in the 3 to 5 minute range, and it just goes up from there. There's a couple of reasons why this section takes so long. The first has to do with that artistic merit idea. I spend a lot of time trying to present the very best version of a question that I can. There's a concept in computer programming called the minimum working example, which refers to the shortest snippet of code that's required to demonstrate a bug or feature without any added complexity, which might distract from the issue or make it harder to understand exactly what's going on. I strive to use the minimal working example in the scenarios that I cover whenever possible because I just think it makes things easier to follow along with. If you've ever submitted a question and had me make a video about that interaction but with 1 or more of the cards changed, that's probably why. So, for example, if I have to do a ruling that has to do with entering the battlefield with an extra +1/+1 counter on it from the Chapter 2 ability of Kamado Faces Kakazan, then maybe I'll change that card to a recommission. This is the same reason why Grizzly Bear shows up in so many of my questions. If you're a regular viewer, then you know that's what I always use when I need a generic creature with no relevant characteristics. Reducing the complexity by the greatest amount possible makes it easier to focus on what the actual interaction at play is. And with a game as complex as Magic, that's not always trivial, even when the question is simplified. Incidentally, if you do this step yourself when submitting a question, that probably does make it more likely that it will get featured on a future daily ruling. Unfortunately, picking the best cards to showcase the interactions often involves some research. Sometimes I'll just happen to know of a card that fits exactly what I'm looking for, but a lot of the time I'll have to get on Scryfall and spend some time searching. And all of this is before I even answer the question. A lot of the time, I will know the answer to the question and the correct reasoning for it immediately, but even in those cases, I'll usually still look up the relevant rules in the CR, because I'll often adapt language directly from the comprehensive rules into my explanations and cite the relevant rules on screen for anyone who might want to look deeper into similar scenarios. One of my biggest gripes about the FAQs and gather rulings that WotC puts out is that they usually just assert that they're correct. There's no way to check them or get further background if you want to know exactly why the ruling is the way that it is. So I think that it's important from an educational standpoint to make reference to the CR wherever practical. The CR research isn't instantaneous, but it's not that bad either. I've probably spent more time reading Magic's comprehensive rules than all but a small handful of judges, so by now I generally can get to the rule that I need pretty quickly. But it definitely does mean that there's extra time added to writing the script. The final thing that makes this step so long is that I spend a lot of time reading and rewriting to try to come up with the cleanest, most concise explanation possible. If I just ran with the first draft of every script that I wrote, I could probably cut my writing time in about half. I've tried to do stuff like that, but it just isn't worth it. The drop in quality is just so bad. If you've ever seen a video where I don't talk about some very obvious interesting twist on the scenario, or I have a confusing explanation that's hard to follow, chances are that I was under the gun and didn't have time to write a better script that day. I still think deadlines are really important though, because having 670% videos is a lot more valuable of a resource than having 30 to 40, 100% videos. After finishing the script, it's time to actually film the episode. Since this is a behind-the-scenes episode, here's a nice Judging for the Win secret. I almost never wear the full judge uniform when I'm recording. I'd say 90% of DDRs are filmed in pajama pants. Sorry if that shatters the illusion for you, I just like pajama pants. They are comfy and easy to wear. If you've ever wondered why I'm framed as a bust shot, well, now you know. Unfortunately, I can't use a similar tactic to make my hair look good, so I have a comb stationed right near the hot seat. I still don't really like my hair, but as I remind myself at least once a week, this isn't a health and beauty channel, and I'm lucky it's not. I mentioned a couple of times on this channel before, but I really hate listening to my voice and watching myself on screen. Even with that being the case, I made the decision really early on that I would feature my real face and my real voice. Why? Because I think the face-to-face aspect is important in judging just like it is in Magic. Unfortunately, this decision dramatically increased the production time of my videos. Turns out that voice acting takes a lot longer than just feeding a file into a text-to-speech program. On the plus side, once I got the teleprompter, it really sped things up. I guess this is another point where I need to shatter some illusions, but ever since a couple of months ago, I've used a teleprompter to record these videos. Having a written script that I can read off saves a bunch of time in post because it's shockingly hard to deliver even a couple of minutes worth of scripted monologue from memory without messing it up. Before I started using it, I would frequently have to film for 2 or 3 times the length of the video just because I couldn't deliver the lines well enough. Now, one take is the norm. Maybe you notice a substantial drop in the amount of cuts in the videos starting a couple of months ago. I know I certainly did. By the way, if you're one of my patrons, you should know that this sort of thing is what your money is going towards. I'm not trying to turn YouTube into a full-time job, so it's not like I really need financial support, but updates to the production value are always great to have. And I actually had the teleprompter recommended to me way earlier, but I dragged my feet on getting one because they're actually kind of expensive. The extra money coming in from Patreon was what convinced me to finally pull the trigger. Same thing with the mirrorless camera. So thank you. And as you saw in the earlier shot, JudgingFtW Studios is a bit more elaborate than just a camera and a tripod. The metal frame that you see is made out of T-slotted aluminum extrusions, which are absolutely amazing and heavily used in industry for similar applications. I highly recommend it if you're a millionaire or if you work somewhere that lets you pick it out of the scrap hopper. Less obvious are the custom fabricated brackets holding my microphone, camera, and monitors to the frame, which my dad and I worked on together. Thanks for lending me your tools and expertise, Dad. After shooting, the last step in the production process is editing. And I'm not gonna lie, if I was a billionaire and I didn't have to work or worry about money ever again, I would still probably be making YouTube videos, but my days editing would absolutely be over. I'm very proud of the amount of streamlining that I've been able to achieve in this workflow, but it still is a pain. The program that I use is called Shotcut, and I mostly use it because it's free and I don't really do any fancy editing, so I've never had to do anything that I couldn't do with it. There's 2 major things that I need to do when I'm editing. First, I cut out all the times that I messed up when I was reading, then I add the graphics. The card images I just download from Scryfall. Occasionally I'll need to make a custom card, and for that I use a program called Magic Set Editor, because again, it's free and I've never had to do anything that I couldn't do with it. The rule citations though are something I'm actually really proud of. Originally, I was doing these by basically putting a text filter on the video, but maybe if you're a longtime fan of the channel, you remember that in the original days, I messed up on these quite a lot. One of my major gripes with Shotcut is that it doesn't really have a great user-friendly interface for doing this sort of thing. So I took matters into my own hands, and I wrote a simple Python program where I can just copy and paste the CR citation into it, and it generates the graphic with a press of a button. And that's the story of how I permanently fixed that problem. If you've ever wondered how I make my thumbnails, there's a very similar story there too. These improvements have probably saved me several hours of my time over the years. Once I'm done editing, the only thing left to do is to render and upload, and my computer takes care of that. So that's all I have to do for today. How am I doing? Thanks again so much to my patrons and everybody else who supports the channel in any way. I really appreciate it. Join me again next time for another Daily Ruling, but until then, I hope you have a great day.